It's time we ask a tough question. What will Joe Biden's legacy be after 5 decades in politics? What Scott Jennings said on CNN is the difficult truth that no one on the panel was ready to accept, drawing from the last 4 years of Joe Biden holding the country's highest office. Listen to this, and you'll know exactly what I mean.
It was very disturbing to learn late in the year about just how how poor his health has become. And I, like many, I did not realize that it had gotten to that point. That being said, I think he showed up for the job. He got the work done. I think some of the accomplishments also in the Middle East and foreign policy will also stand the test of time.
You think the Middle East is in better shape today than when he took office?
Well, I think he got our hostages home. I think that's a big deal. I think it's important.
I'm sorry, which hostages?
He's gotten a number of people home. He was able.
There's still 100 people over there.
Well, there were more than that.
Including some Americans. Look, I think he's gonna leave office in disgrace. The Hunter Biden pardon was disgraceful. He's going to be remembered largely for inflation and for the disastrous Afghanistan pullout. And I think as we continue to, we're just getting the first draft of this now, but as we continue to learn about the massive cover-up that went on, not about his health, but about his mental acuity, to cover that up, the efforts that were undertaken by the White House staff, by his family, not in the last couple of months, but for all 4 years, I think it's going to be a really ugly chapter. It's a diminished presidency because of it. And I think we still don't know the full extent of what they did to try to hide what they've been doing over in the West Wing.
Now, before I get into the details, here's a big picture perspective that stamps what Scott Jennings said here. It's that Donald Trump has become the very first president in the last century and a half to win 2 non-consecutive terms. The only other president to do that in U.S. history was Grover Cleveland in the late 1800s. By the way, I'd love you to be a part of these important conversations, so be sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell to never miss out. Now, I think this fact tells you something. America collectively and actively decided to go back to a president that they had previously voted out of office because the incumbent president had made things worse rather than better. And as they say, your last impression is your lasting impression. Joe Biden's presidency at the end of his career has tainted the memory of his entire 50 years in public service. And of course, you knew that when polling data in July revealed 2/3 of Democrats believe Joe Biden should drop out. Even his own base understood that Joe Biden's age, senility, and political baggage would sink the entire party with him in the election. Of course, there's still quite a few people left that think America wants to hear a defense of Joe Biden when the facts speak for themselves, and that's what we saw in this panel.
I think leaving in disgrace is when you have an insurrection at the Capitol. Like, that's leaving in disgrace. Being impeached twice is leaving in disgrace. So that's a difference. I think Joe Biden's going to be remembered in the short term for what you were talking about, whether or not he had the capacity to lead, who knew what when. I mean, there are many people outside of the very small network of Anita Dunn and Valerie Biden Owens and Jill Biden and Hunter. There aren't many people who knew the concerns that were there or whether or not he was up or fit for the job. And so those questions will be asked. Over the long term, this is somebody a lot like Mitch McConnell. You don't necessarily have to agree with everything they stood for. You don't have to agree with every vote. But you always knew they put the American people first. You always knew that. We had different paths of getting there, but that's what they believed in.
What? This country is tired of these political platitudes at this point, and that is why the Democrats failed so massively in the election. What's funny is that Joe Biden apparently still believes he would have won against Donald Trump had he stayed in the race until the end instead of dropping out in July. There's a report that came out in the Washington Post this week saying, in part, and I quote, Biden and some of his aides still believe he should have stayed in the race despite the rocky debate performance and low poll numbers that prompted Democrats to pressure him to drop out. Biden and these aides have told people in recent days that he could have defeated Trump according to people familiar with their comments, who spoke on the condition of anonymity to describe private conversations. We don't even have to begin to describe how much bigger of a disaster it would have been, especially with an approval rating in an abysmal mid-30s. But even if you took a bird's eye look, it's not about Joe Biden or Kamala Harris. It's about a much larger crisis of leadership in the Democratic Party at a time when the Republicans are as united as ever around Donald Trump. And even now, after the election is over, it's almost like Biden is trying to prove his critics and detractors right by making some of the most disastrous moves for the reputation of both himself and the party. It's not just the blanket pardon given to his son Hunter for crimes he may have committed, but also the decision to allow Ukraine to use American-made ballistic missiles in the war against Russia, which can lead to a dangerous escalation of war. Plus, of course, the crisis of illegal immigration and the disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan that put the Taliban back in power after 2 decades. And adding insult to injury, we saw Joe Biden this week giving out American Medals of Honor to the likes of Hillary Clinton, George Soros, and Liz Cheney, which Elon Musk called a travesty, and I agree. A lot of this reputational damage comes after a series of bad and arguably self-serving decisions by Joe Biden that started with the pardon of his son in early December. And perhaps what rightly offended more people about that was the lies and obfuscation around it for the several years prior.
It was a total disgrace. He's leaving office in disgrace because of this pardon. And it's not just the pardon, it's the lying. Lied to the American people. According to NBC News, he and his top aides hatched a plan to lie to the American people. And then this week, he didn't even have the guts to go out to the White House podium and take questions about it. He sent Karine Jean-Pierre out there, who was also a part of the lying. And then she continued to gaslight the American people and the media. The American people ought to be pissed, but the media, the people who cover this White House, ought to be absolutely livid at the gaslighting and then the continued gaslighting and the hostility towards the idea of transparency. This is a monumental disgrace. You think 38, 39% job approval is low? Wait until we test him as he leaves office. He's going out of office as one of the least liked and most divisive presidents we've ever had.
That's why Scott Jennings is such a great counterweight on a network like CNN. There's a point at which the voters and the people at large aren't even concerned with the abstract politics of it all, more than the tangible impact on their own life. And it's very hard to argue that of the 2 most important voting issues for America, immigration and inflation, that Joe Biden's presidential legacy is a net positive. And whether you like it or not, when people are desperate, they look towards someone that exudes strength. In that sense, Donald Trump and his political persona is only just a reactionary mirror to the weakness at home and the world stage displayed by the Biden administration.
I think Americans are sick of Joe Biden, uncommon nonsense that comes out of the Democratic Party, and they're sick of feeling like this country has been running in place, stuck in quicksand for the last 4 years. 3/4 of Americans think we're on the wrong track, but there are hints of optimism in the American people. There was a CBS News survey that came out last weekend, and more Americans thought that Donald Trump would increase peace and stability in the world than that he would not. So you can start to feel the green shoots of optimism. And so when I look ahead to what he's going to do at the inaugural and what he could do in the first 100 days of his administration, I hope he senses that from the American people, hits the ground running, and strikes the optimistic notes, because I think people are tired of having weak leadership that has taken us off in the wrong direction. He has a real opportunity here to do something amazing, and I hope he does it.
We hope so too, but that's for the next 4 years to decide. Right now, the Democratic leadership needs to take a long, hard look in the mirror and ask itself some very tough questions if it wants to come back in the next election. And it's because America at large needs a reasonable counterweight to Donald Trump and a strong opposition party. But let me know in the comments if you see that happening anytime soon, because we don't really see any promising signs of that so far.